Welcome to our program, General Newton.
Daniel, always good to be with you, and I'm delighted that we have another opportunity to speak.
U.S. President Donald Trump says that Ukraine can retake all territories taken by the Russian side. Also, according to the General Kit Kellogg, U.S. has allowed some strikes, Ukrainian strikes, deep inside Russia. Do you feel that this is biggest Trump's administration U-turn on Ukraine?
Absolutely, and I'm delighted to hear the president and his pronouncement. He's supported Ukraine through the months of this current administration, but the latest is significant, Daniel. Not only does it lift up the Ukrainian people and President Zelensky, but your valiant military in the field trying to not only defend against Russia and their onslaught, but now the effort to push them back on their side of the border, and to continue this war, not to go from what I would call been currently an active defense to now more of a deep battle, which is exactly what's needed if Ukraine is going to now stem the tide and defeat Russia in this latest war.
Also, according to the Wall Street Journal, Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky asked U.S. President Donald Trump to provide Ukraine with long-range Tomahawk cruise missiles. What is your assessment of this military option, military possibility, and are we all going to receive these weapons in Ukraine? Is this achievable task right now? Is it a realistic option?
Well, I've been advocating for long-range strike capabilities for a while. Certainly advocated to add significant air power, specifically F-16s, a year or so ago. But the idea now of providing Tomahawk cruise missiles to the Ukrainians, I think, is a significant. I think it's within what I would call arm's reach. It would now be able to range Russian targets deep inside Russia, somewhere between 800 to 1,500 nautical miles, and could go after command posts, logistics supply centers, their oil infrastructure, really take the fight to Russia well beyond obviously in the Donbass front lines. Secondly, I think it also will enable President Zelensky and his military to really now put the war inside of Russia, whereby it affects directly their economy. My data tells me that the Russian economy is based on 20 to 30% of oil revenue to partners such as China, India, Brazil, and others, but to now put into harm's way their ability to produce oil and create a commodity to fuel their economy is also significant. That's not going to change the war in a matter of weeks or months, but over a year plus time period. But it's now time to take the fight to Russia, and to doing so with Tomahawk cruise missiles. My final point, Daniel, is, however, it's one thing to provide Tomahawk cruise missiles. It's another thing, and this is on the Trump administration, to authorize the use of those weapon systems in order for Ukraine to hold at risk these key targets in Russia. So it's a matter of providing the weapons capabilities. In this case, we're talking specifically Tomahawks, but it's also what needs to come with that is the authorization to use those weapons.
Do you feel that this is a bargaining chip from U.S. side, or a real military strategy to help Ukraine to gain an upper hand in this war?
I think it's to enable Ukraine to get an upper hand in this war, as you say in your question. Notice how what President Trump has changed his efforts to provide weapons capabilities through foreign military sales or sales to Europe. Then Europe, our European partners, specifically NATO, then provides the weapons directly to Ukraine. This would also be the case of the Tomahawk cruise missiles. It's another, however, a move by the president, not only as we focus on Ukraine and their ability to wage war against Russia, but it also tells Putin in Russia that the United States is becoming more and more all in, willing to give offensive weapons capability with deep strike penetration capabilities, that really shows Putin that we are serious about him ending this conflict, and that from President Trump's rhetoric, and I believe he believes his rhetoric, that to really now bring back to the borders Ukrainian territory that certainly is in the Donbass region, and perhaps even try to put into play getting back Crimea, which was, as you know, taken in 2014. So what we're seeing here, Daniel, is all instruments of national power being discussed. First and foremost, information. Secondly, the diplomatic efforts to secure peace, but also an end to this war, but more favorable on the terms of Ukraine. Third is the military aspect of this, to provide the weapon systems and the capabilities and the authorization to use these weapon systems capabilities that will then enable effects not only on the battlefield, but now the economic dimension of these national security tools. So all that wrapped in there. We still have a lot ahead of us. There's no guarantees with that regard, but we're certainly, from Washington, D.C.'s perspective, and the United States support, and certainly President Trump's support of Ukraine, is moving absolutely in the right direction.
Do you see this as also a turning point in this war?
I think it's a turning point, as I mentioned, in terms of the diplomatic information, potentially the economic aspect of this. We still haven't delivered these Tomahawk cruise missiles. That still needs to be followed through with. But should that happen, and then Ukraine is actually able to use these weapon systems, I do believe that could be a game changer on the battlefield and in the success against Russia.
From your perspective, how would Ukraine be able to launch this Tomahawk cruise missile? Because Ukraine doesn't have strategic aviation or some serious Navy assets to use this Tomahawk cruise missiles.
Right. Most folks believe, and generally speaking, the Tomahawk cruise missiles are from water-based or ship-based employment, but there are also means to employ the Tomahawk cruise missiles from land. The United States Marine Corps has demonstrated this capability. So it would follow suit that with us providing, the United States providing Tomahawk cruise missiles to our European partners, and in turn to Ukraine, it would also have to come with the means to deliver these capabilities. We do have on land Tomahawk cruise missile platforms that we could provide. Also, we would need to provide those. That also gives the Tomahawk cruise missiles a modicum of mobility in terms of being able to move around on the battlefield as well. So I believe that would be part of, and it would have to be part of the weapons package we'd be giving to Ukraine.
Let's also cover current Ukraine's campaign against Russia's oil refining capacity. According to new recent estimates, up to 38% of Russia's oil refining capacity has been knocked out by Ukrainian drones, according to the Moscow Times, citing new recent estimates by some Russia's analysts. What is your take on this new effect of Ukraine's strikes inside Russia, and could this change Vladimir Putin's calculus on this war?
Well, first off, that 38% number is the same number I have according to my sources, but I would anticipate that number to increase perhaps into 2026 as Ukraine is able to, again, keep in threat or to continue to threat Russia's oil production capacity. So that number is going to only go up, especially if we're able to provide Ukraine with Tomahawk cruise missiles to go for a deeper strike. I may also add that your drone production capabilities has also been significant. All militaries in the world are taking note of Ukraine's successes in drone manufacturing, but also drone employment as well. But I do believe that you're going to see increased pressure on President Putin's economy, and perhaps even on Putin himself, in terms of driving him to the negotiating table. Really is going to be going through the economic national security tool. And principally, if Ukraine is able to increase that pressure by destroying a number of more Russian oil production facilities and capacities, that's really going to have an impact. Now, the other end of that, Daniel, is where Washington, D.C., specifically President Trump and his administration, can also put economic pressures on Russia, specifically Putin, whereby we provide secondary sanctions against tariffs and other tools against those key oil consumers of Russia. As I mentioned, China, India, Brazil, and others who want to do trade along the oil and natural gas markets with Russia. That's another aspect and another end of the spectrum of how the economy of Russia can be affected. So it can be affected kinetically with strikes. It can also be done with regard to secondary sanctions or tariffs against those oil consumers and business partners of Russia.
Let's cover also Vladimir Putin's mind and his strategy. Do you feel that he is getting closer to negotiating a ceasefire deal, or he's getting closer to just continue this war against Ukraine?
Not yet. I don't think he's particularly close to the negotiating table. I think we're probably months away from seeing that. That's why the persistence of providing, we mentioned earlier, the Tomahawk cruise missiles from a military standpoint, going in for a deep strike needs to be made. I think the fact that Ukraine going after beyond just the battle lines up front in Donbass and so forth, going deeper with your drones and other capabilities, we need to keep that, Ukraine needs to keep that pressure on. But I do believe at some point that the objective here is to drive Putin to the negotiating table. That will be that'll be very difficult in and of itself. But you need to put pressure on him militarily. But most importantly, I think you put pressure on him economically. Diplomatically, however, I see even a tighter circle being now constructed with the United States and NATO, United States and NATO and the European Union with Ukraine. That's also very important. But we're still in the early stages, I believe, still well before a timeline that I see perhaps in 2026 where Putin will be driven to the negotiating table. But keeping the pressure on, that's what's going to succeed here in getting him to that table. And again, to negotiate, stop this war, and do it on terms favorable to Ukraine and the West.
From your perspective, how effective could be this Tomahawk cruise missiles against Russia's air defense assets? Because Russia has a lot of such air defense assets trying to intercept all Ukrainian drones, missiles, and how would be is this system successful against Russia's military hardware, military weaponry, and technology?
It can be against, Russian air defenses and missile defenses are highly capable. However, we saw in the conflict with Iran, the 12-day air campaign back in June, followed up by United States Air Force B-2 stealth bombers and Navy Tomahawk cruise missiles going after the nuclear weapons sites in Iran and doing significant, if not destroying their ability to produce a nuclear weapon. But also part of that air campaign was lodged against what was Russia-based capabilities with regard to their S-series air defenses and so forth. So we have a tendency, Daniel, to make Russia out to be 12 feet tall, where maybe they're only 6 feet tall or 5'5" and so forth. But the point being is that the relentless defense of Ukraine by the Ukrainian military, and then the ability to go and strike beyond just what I call an active defense, but now into the deep battle, would include also Russia's air defense capabilities, as well as their offensive capabilities to strike innocent Ukrainian civilians, to go after Ukraine's oil infrastructure and other parts of the Ukrainian economy. That needs to stop. And by providing these cruise missiles, as I mentioned, and other capabilities to go after both Russia's defensive capabilities, as you mentioned in your question, but also to go offensively after their offensive capabilities.
It is interesting that President Trump says that Ukraine is achieving some success on the battlefield because Russia is not achieving much, but in fact is losing some ground in Ukraine because Ukraine has recently conducted some successful counteroffensive operations on the east of Ukraine. What is your assessment of this effort on the ground and current situation on the ground right now?
My sources tell me that the situation on the ground, specifically in the eastern part of the Donbass areas, it's still a matter of a stalemate. but Ukraine is putting up a significant fight, gaining back small parts of the territory. I think that's significant not only on the battlefield, but mainly for morale as well. But again, to me, the essence and the level of effort not to be just on the front lines between Russian forces and Ukrainian forces directly in contact, but we also now ought to be going after a more deep battle strategy. And that's where we need to provide Ukraine with the arms and the capabilities and the authorizations, Daniel. This is very important. The authorizations to use these weapon systems to go and in a deeper battle context, rather than just doing, the area defense and so forth. We've got to get out of this point of just a World War I-like stalemate conditions on the battlefield. We've got to give Ukraine the weapon systems and the authorization to go deep where it hurts Putin economically and even militarily, to get him and force him to the negotiating table.
You just mentioned also about greenlighting the strikes on Russia. According to the US media, Pentagon has been blocking some strikes on the Russian territory, and according to the Wall Street Journal, the new review mechanism has been established under which Pete Hegseth is authorized to greenlight such strikes on Russian territory. Should we expect any kind of change in this mechanism of authorization of strikes on Russia?
I think the mechanism itself points to the fact that the Trump administration is now on the same sheet of music from the Oval Office to the Pentagon in terms of the authorization and use of force of these weapon systems that are provided by the United States, again, as I mentioned, to Europe and now into Ukraine. That's key and essential. What's the use of providing offensive capabilities such as ATACMS or Tomahawks if Ukraine is able to get a hold of Tomahawk missiles? What's the use of providing these weapon systems if you cannot use the full authorization, the full weapons capability, the full weapon suite of these weapons to really go to do an effect on Russia? It's almost as if Putin, therefore, kind of thumbs his nose at these significant weapon systems that we provide Ukraine, or United States and Europe provides Ukraine. But if Ukraine has one arm tied behind its back and not able to use the full range and capabilities and power of these weapon systems, they're of less use than they would be otherwise. I think my point here, Daniel, is those authorizations are now in force, and I would anticipate those authorizations to also be provided along with the Tomahawk cruise missiles, should they be provided to Ukraine. It also goes along with that as the authorizations to use them.
Also, recently, US President Donald Trump has reminded about his decision on moving closer to Russia several submarines in response to Dmitry Medvedev's reckless threats against the United States. What is your take on that and this response of the US side?
Well, they are reckless by Medvedev, but nonetheless, I believe that what we're really talking about here is strategic deterrence. And what President Trump echoed in his comments were that deterrence really takes two things. It takes capability and will. And he demonstrated and was very vocal about certainly in this case, he mentioned sea-launched ballistic missile capabilities from U.S. submarines. We've always used all three legs of the strategic triad to deter Russia aggression. The president underscored one key leg of that, and that is submarine-launched ballistic missiles. I would remind our viewers, we also have, as part of our triad nuclear weapons capabilities to strategically deter Russia and China, for that matter. We have intercontinental bombers. We also have intercontinental ballistic missiles. I commanded at Minot Air Force Base in North Dakota. We had two legs of the triad. I had command of a number of B-52 bombers, but also I hosted 150 intercontinental ballistic missiles. You add that to President Trump's pronouncement of those sea-launched ballistic missiles, that is really a demonstration to Putin, both physically, but also from a declaration of deterrence, what the United States commitment is to maintain the peace, and that is to deter his aggression, but also the fact that we back that up with highly capable nuclear triad forces.
Let's cover also recent meeting between Secretary of War Pete Hegseth, US President Donald Trump, and hundreds of US generals, admirals, and other senior officers yesterday. What is your view on such a meeting and the main messages which were received by US senior officers and the most important points of the statement made by President Trump and War Secretary?
Yes, that was yesterday at Quantico Marine Base outside of Washington, D.C. There were actually 838 general officers and admirals, all in the operational chain of command, invited to hear Secretary Hegseth and President Trump. Also accompanying those generals and admirals were their senior enlisted advisors, which is key as well. Secretary Hegseth was very crisp, very professional in his delivery. He underscored trying to bring back a more warrior ethos inside the ranks. I would advise Secretary Hegseth that those men and women, those general officers and admirals and their enlisted leaders were perhaps a part of a cohort of the most highly combat tested and combat capable senior officers we've had in the ranks for decades because of coming out of 9/11 and then our combat operations in Iraq, in Afghanistan, and in the global war on terror has really made that room of generals and admirals perhaps our most capable and most highly combat experienced team of senior leaders. What I would also ask the Secretary to underscore, as well as the President, and we heard a little bit of this from the President, is to focus less on perhaps on the need to exclaim warrior ethos, but focus on increasing and enhancing the United States military's readiness in terms of current operations, but also the investment of future weapons such as the B-21 bomber that will replace the B-2 stealth bomber. We need to replace the intercontinental ballistic missiles that I mentioned. We need to increase the size of our United States Navy in terms of those submarines, but also our surface warfare ships as well. We need to make sure, and Secretary Hegseth made a commitment to this, to increase the training and the exercises and the weapon systems, put them in the hands of our men and women, our 2.1 million men and women on our active duty, our Guard and Reserve. Finally, I wish I could have heard more, but I'm sure you're going to hear it in the future, more of Secretary Hegseth, but also President Trump's view of the strategic environment. Key to this is obviously supporting Ukraine in a valiant effort to defeat Russia, but it's also to support Israel, continue to support Israel in their pursuit of destroying Hamas, but also to reset the Mideast. And then there's my main concern is how to stem against a rising China as they're modernizing their military in terms of quantity and quality more than any other military in the world. And so that's really, I think, moving forward. Final point, Daniel, on that meeting yesterday, I would expect there may be more meetings in the future, specifically for Secretary Hegseth to discuss with his generals and admirals how to improve the U.S. defense industrial base and reduce the time of getting setting a requirement, say in the Air Force, the Army, the Navy, the Marines, and getting that weapon system into the hands of our men and women in uniform, not in terms of years, but in terms of months. Second, I will expect him also to address in another forum this idea of deterring aggression in the 21st century, not only against Russia and what we've seen him do to Ukraine and Europe to date, but also in the Mideast, particularly with a now subdued Iran, but also, more importantly, the Indo-Pacific region led by China, wanting to displace the United States as not only a regional power, but a superpower.
And my final question to you, what do you think about the possible security risks for organizing such a big meeting with high command of the U.S. armed forces in one place, organizing such a meeting of hundreds of generals from various theaters from around the globe?
Well, I'm sure there's plenty of security in and around the Washington, D.C. area, but it poses a security risk. But those security risks are mitigated by our military, but also by the Secret Service, even local law enforcement in and around Quantico, Virginia, to include the local police as well as the state police. Thankfully, as a result of that, again, that is an unprecedented meeting of of senior leaders in the military, to include Secretary Hegseth and President Trump. There were no issues there, but it does take a very difficult, broad, large undertaking in order to protect and secure the attendees of the meeting. Thankfully, it went off without a hitch, and they're now returning to their stations across the globe and anticipate them to arrive in their areas of responsibility safe and sound.
Thank you, General Newton, for your time and for your support for Ukraine, and glory to Ukraine.
Glory to Ukraine. I hope that went well, Daniel. That was a great interview. Good job.